So I know I've been a little bit MIA lately, and a lot of that has to do with mostly just this time of year being really busy for me. If you watch the stream or may have heard me mention in a previous video, I work two jobs. Both are in education, and right now we're in the middle of like semester turnover slash new things starting. So I've been unfortunately really busy, and it has made my streaming and my video production suffer. So I apologize, but hopefully we're going to get things back on track here in the near and immediate future. So likely going to have a short stream tonight because I do still have some more stuff I have to do to prep for the beginning of the semester. Tomorrow I teach a night class, and when I get back from that, I should return to my normal streaming schedule. And this weekend and during the day next week, I hope to actually have some additional stream time above and beyond what I would normally do, so keep an eye out on Twitter for when I'll be going live. The rest of the family is going on a vacation, and I will be here at home, so I am going to use the free time to hopefully publish some more videos, get caught up on all the stuff I wanted to do for this YouTube channel, and use the excess time to just stream some more and just hang out. So yeah, hoping to get back and get caught up. So with that being said, I think I've picked a great time to return from being MIA because we got a new patch today along with some new patch notes, and there were some widespread changes, some of which were relatively expected and some of which were rather unexpected, and it's causing a lot of discussion, and from what I've seen anyway in the discussions, a lot of discontent. There's a lot of people unhappy, just based on what I've seen on Reddit alone. If you believe everything you read there, it is Old Testament stuff, to quote Ghostbusters, right? It's fire and brimstone coming down from the skies, 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes, the dead rising from the grave, human sacrifice, dogs and cats getting along, mass hysteria, etc., etc. So we're going to go ahead and first go through what the patch covers without any sort of analysis, just so that we can do it quickly. Chances are, because again, unfortunately, I post my videos late because I work two jobs, you've probably already seen the news. I doubt I'm your first source of information, but if I am, just in case, we're going to go through the changes real quick, and then afterwards we'll do speculative analysis. So let's dive right into it, right? First up is Crystal Tower Crafter. This went from a 2-2 base stats to 1-1. Dune Smuggler and Dune Stalker are being changed so that they move a creature that is in the lane that they are in, meaning that you play them in a lane and then that sends that creature to another lane. Their reasoning when they were talking about this in the notes, right, in the letter from the devs, and we'll put a link to this blog post from the devs in the video description, but basically they were trying to avoid one, non-interactivity, right? So there were issues where player one plays a creature, player two tries to defend against that creature. They play a guard, maybe they play like Fighters Guild Recruit, something like that, and then when they pass the turn, it goes back to player one. They play Dune Stalker or Dune Smuggler in the other lane, and then they bring their other creature with them, and they've basically just abandoned the first lane, and now they're over in the second lane all by themselves again. And not only are they all by themselves now, but they have a 2-0 creature lead most often in those scenarios. So they kind of control the lane, and then they just try to snowball from there. And so it can create some level of non-interactivity, if you will. And it also, it just meant that you were getting a lot of value out of those creatures because, when you play a card like Fighters Guild Recruit or just any guard in general, you're expecting to get some value out of that. You're being reactive, right? You're already on the defensive, and now you're also getting no value. And so while the lanes are meant to be an interesting tactical dynamic, cards like this, which are supposed to play into that tactical dynamic, were letting people almost pretend like the lanes didn't exist at all and you were not interacting. So anyway, that's that change. So we'll talk more about like how I feel about that when we get to the analysis part. I've probably already over talked on that because I said we were going to do this quick. All right. Other changes: Pillaging Tribune, nerfed so that it now, when it comes into play, you give a friendly creature drain this turn, as opposed to all friendly creatures in this lane. It now only affects one creature, but the interesting part of that is that it doesn't mean you have to play Pillaging Tribune in the same lane, so that's a thing anyway. Snake-Tooth Necklace went from just being drain to when you summon this, you give the wielder drain this turn. Slaughterfish spawning got moved from a 3-cost to a 4-cost. Similarly, Slaughterfish, like the individual ones, got moved. For the most part, unless you were a very new player and you were playing the unupgraded versions, this almost never matters. The only other time it matters is in the case of like a bounce effect like Cast Out. Soul Rest Marshal went back to what it used to be, where it reduces the cost of a card by 6, but now he costs 6 as well. He can still summon copies of himself though, so we'll talk about that. And then lastly, one of the things that I myself have advocated for, Hissgrove is now at the start of your turn. If you have 15 or more max Magicka, get your Swamp Leviathans. So, doesn't instantly proc anymore. You do have to have it in play for at least a turn, and then it triggers at the start of the turn. So, those are the changes. So now we're gonna go back to the top, and we're gonna kind of do some speculative analysis slash I'll share my thoughts because I'll pretend like you care. Hooray! Crystal Tower Crafter. On the surface, it feels a little harsh. I know some other people have suggested in the past that it should just kind of go to a 2-1 because that means that it, after one action, can still be killed by Firebolt. It also means that cards like Earthbone Spinner would still kill it outright. I tended to agree with that. However, one of the things that they said is that cards that interact with actions will get better as we make new powerful actions, and Crystal Tower Crafter presents a looming future problem for both power level and ubiquity, which means like whether or not it's an auto-clue or seen in every deck. So obviously we don't know what their plans for the future are. We don't know what kind of new cards they have in the hopper for development, what kind of things they've planned for future expansions. So right now, as I said, I think it probably could have went to a 2-1, and it feels a little harsh, but we don't know what's coming. We don't know what kind of special effects, new kinds of actions are coming. There may be a chance where right now we think this is utterly unplayable and it's gone too far, and then, you know, lo and behold, they might reveal the next expansion and suddenly it's back to being not only relevant but good again, right? So if anything, I would just take away that this is not the first time they have talked about future design issues or future design space, and I think it comes up a few more times in just this article alone, and to me that's encouraging just because that means that they are working on things and they're trying to be aware of things, so they are planning for the future. And right now everyone's wondering when they're going to pull off the beta tag and make it, you know, be a full release. But to me, I'm also encouraged because this means they're looking beyond even that, right? So while we're being impatient and we want you know, the mobile client now, and we want new cards now, and so on and so forth, you know, I like the pleasant reminders that, you know, there is a future and they're planning for it. So alright, so Dune Smuggler and Dune Stalker, these ones are interesting. I don't think that anyone would have said these cards were overpowered. I don't think anyone would have said that either of these were oppressive. but I can understand and I could actually defend their decision to make this nerf based on, again, the lack of interactivity that the mechanic, at least in its original state, was causing, right? It's not like, say, Shadow Shift where it's a one-time action and then you move your guy to avoid, right? Like that's not the same because it doesn't create, as I said when I was kind of covering it before, right? That scenario where you went from, you have one creature in one lane, they respond with their own creature, and then you play a card, and now suddenly you have two creatures in an empty lane, and you've just abandoned it, and now you're also ahead in that lane. So I can see why they would do this. And again, if they're planning, for the future or toward the future, there again may be other reasons why they're doing this, but from an interactivity standpoint, or that idea of again, if player one plays a Mournhold Trader, player two plays Fighter Guild Recruit, you go back to player one and he plays Dune Smuggler and he moves the Mournhold Trader. Not only are they now ahead in the other lane, not only are they now smacking you in the face for 5, but the Fighters Guild Recruit player basically went from maybe getting, the value they would expect out of their play to essentially getting no value at all, right? So it's a huge tempo swing, and I can see where it could cause problems. Now, a lot of people are going to say things, and rightfully so, like, Monk already has a hard time, and this nerf punishes Monk, specifically Pilfer Monk. And I agree. There's no other way to say it. I don't think there's any other way you could take a stance that says, oh no, this doesn't hurt Pilfer Monk, and Pilfer Monk's in a good place when you consider how underrepresented it is. But I can still understand why they made this change. But let's be honest. At this point, until we see another influx of cards or the next expansion, I'm not sure that they're going to do enough to make Pilfer Monk be viable. Let me stop. Alright, it's viable now, but I don't think that it's ever going to be a top 1 or top 2 or maybe even top tier 3 deck, right? So if you think about tiers, right, like it's probably towards the bottom, and let's be honest, it's going to be that way until we see some new cards. So while nerfing this hurts it, it was already hurt, right? Like it's kicking Monk while it's down, but that's the unfortunate truth. But again, so in my opinion, sometimes cards don't need to be overpowered to warrant a nerf. They just have to either limit design space or create again, kind of go back to the Crystal Tower Crafter, right? Like one of the running jokes with Crystal Tower Crafter was, if you were going second and you had the Ring of Magicka and you play Crystal Tower Crafter and then you lesser ward it, there wasn't a lot that people could do unless they were running like Suppressor or something. There wasn't really a lot people could do to get around that, like as your opener. And then if on the following turn, so maybe they play a creature, and then on the following turn you firebolt their creature and you Shadow Shift Crystal Tower Crafter around, and you've got a 5/5 ward on essentially your second turn. The running joke was like fun and interactive with air quotes, right? It just snowballed out of control, and because there was a lack of quality ways to interact with it in a timely manner, even though there were ways to interact with it. And the same could be said, as we scroll back down, right, about the Dune Smuggler, Dune Stalker stuff. Like, you can interact with stuff, but by the time you get to where you're interacting, they've usually built such a lead that it's, it either doesn't feel good or it's kind of a moot point. So, Crystal Tower Crafter in the same way. This one was just a more, I'm not going to say oppressive card, but a more weighty card in terms of like, yeah, people saw this and they could recognize the power of it and felt like it needed a nerf. I don't think anyone, again, felt like these needed a nerf, but I can understand where they could limit design space. So, in my opinion, to circle back to where I started with this thought, sometimes changes or nerfs need to happen if they could potentially cause problems for the future or don't promote at least some level of interactivity. Now, I don't think that every card needs to be interactive, but for the most part, there should be like a good reason for it, or they should be a small percent. So I think this is a step in the right direction. All right. These ones are hot button. Pillaging Tribune and Snake-Tooth Necklace. Obviously, these are big nerfs to life gain and very directly, in some cases, control. Control Mage kind of depended on Pillaging Tribune for big swings in life gain. Ramp Scout, as of late, was dependent on Snake-Tooth Necklace. And I think that these are part of the reason why so many people are upset with this patch and think the sky is falling. And to that, I would say that I don't think it's as bad as you guys think. And I think it's right to feel that way, especially if you're a diehard Control player, because Control hasn't been in a good spot for a while. And it certainly feels underrepresented on the ladder at times, but I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like I remember a time when Control Mage was played without Pillaging Tribune. Now, granted, Control Mage had a lot of other cards in it that were really powerful at the time, so it probably didn't need it, but like it wasn't that long ago. Similarly, I remember when Ramp Scout didn't necessarily need or play with Snake-Tooth Necklace. Now, since that time, you know, we've got some new cards. People's collections are filling out. People have kind of shifted away from the like fear of breaking runes to the, oh, it's not that bad, I guess I can play an aggro deck, and now there's a lot of them. So like these kind of became, you know, slightly more of a necessity, but I don't think that it's the end of the world. I would also say that, so Pillaging Tribune is definitely a nerf. Like, there's no way around that. But one of the nice things is that in the past, there were times where if I was playing like Control Mage or I was playing a deck that ran Pillaging Tribune, sometimes I would play creatures in an empty lane if I knew I was going to Pillaging Tribune, let's say like the following turn, as opposed to playing them in a lane where I wanted to be able to like block and trade with a creature, just because I wanted to maximize my Pillaging Tribune value. Now that's gone, I can put them wherever I want, and then I can put Tribune wherever I want, because at least it doesn't have to be in the same lane, so that's a positive. And I would say overall it's probably going to cut your healing in half. It was really rare, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it was really rare if I was playing a Control Mage deck, because a lot of times, or just a control-based deck that ran Tribune, a lot of times you were using your creatures to trade, so it was rare that I had like 3 other creatures ready to go. A lot of times it was 1 or 2 creatures. So if it was 1 creature, then no harm, no foul. Tribune's the same as it was. If it was 2, then I say like cut in half, because it might have been, you know, 2 creatures of roughly equivalent size. So now you're only getting 1 of them. But even in those cases, it's not necessarily in half, right? Like maybe you had a Manticora and a Hive Defender, right? So now you went from 9 to 6. That's not terrible. I mean, it's still a nerf, but it's not terrible. In the early game, you might have 2 Hive Defenders, so that's a cut in half, right? So yeah, I mean, it's certainly a nerf, but I'm not convinced that it's, all it does is make it so you just don't outright win, right? Pillaging Tribune had the power to not just like gain you life, but just outright let you win the game. And I think what people forget is that in a mid-range style monk deck, which used to be a thing for a bit, and with some of these nerfs, might see some popularity again, who knows, or might see it in the future. And to me, that's the big one, right? Pillaging Tribune, when you looked at what it did for its cost, it was too powerful. Again, not that we want to nerf things with the current meta is, but I think this is, again, good for the future, right? Good for design space, because Pillaging Tribune had the ability to start creeping into mid-range decks, and then it would become that scenario where if you're racing another person but you're not running the deck that has Pillaging Tribune, you're just going to lose, because they're going to hit a point where they're going to gain like 15 life back in 1 turn, And if you don't have that same capability to do that exact same thing, then they've just essentially won the race, right? Like, life swings go both ways. It's not just killing your opponent before they kill you, but sometimes it's just doing enough, but also gaining enough life to put it out of reach for them. And Tribune was often seen as a control card, but again, planning for the future, I could see it being a problem in mid-range decks, or even the top end of a curve in an aggro deck, because it would be brutal in that kind of scenario where if you're playing an aggressive deck, but then you also ran Tribune for the mirror. It was just really, really strong. I think now it's kind of specifically a control card, where before it had the potential to just be so strong that it was an everything card. Alright, so Snake-Tooth Necklace, I don't think it's as big of a nerf to Scout as some people think, because a lot of times, when, at least in my experience, when I played it in Scout, I would play Snake-Tooth, and then usually that creature either died in the trade because it was like an emergency heal, or they would then trade into the creature afterwards just to get the drain off the board. So I very often only got like one use out of it anyway. I think where it's really a nerf, it would be to like Action Assassin and like an indirect nerf to Rothgar Forge, because you're gonna, with Forge, unless it's a creature with charge, you're gonna get Snake-Tooth Necklace on it, and then sometimes in the past, getting the drain from a Forge could like swing a game back in your favor. Now it's going to get it for just that turn, but because you just played that creature, it won't be able to attack without charge, and so it's just going to be +1/+1, right? Action Assassin, I think it's going to be the nerf there, because you can't like double Snake-Tooth with the Gardener of Swords, and or just kind of use and abuse it. I think that was more likely to be a scenario where you were trying to get the most out of your Snake-Tooth. So yeah, that's kind of where I am on that. I don't think that one's as bad as people think. I mean, it's bad. Again, a nerf is a nerf. Like, I'm not discounting it, but a lot of times, at least when I was using Snake-Tooth Necklace, it was for like a one-time shot anyway, and anytime it wasn't a one-time shot, like if you Snake-Tooth an Odaving or something, a lot of times it might as well have been a one-time shot, because let's be honest, like if you slap it on an Odaving and you gain 11 and that wasn't enough to help you stabilize at that point, like yeah. So that's that. Slaughterfish spawning. A lot of people felt like this might not have needed a nerf. I don't necessarily think it needed a nerf, and I don't think the card was oppressive, but it always felt weird to me that the card was as strong as it was, because you were basically like often requiring 2 cards to answer it, and if you didn't have the 2 cards to answer it right away, even if you could trade afterwards, it was like getting a 6/2 stats for 3, but in neutral. Like, the thing that stands out to me the most about this card isn't as much like the stats and the ability to snowball as it is that this is like, it's uncharacteristically strong for a neutral card. When you think about neutral cards, a lot of times they are typically overcosted a bit, because they're meant, in my opinion anyway, from a design standpoint, to fill a void that your deck might be lacking because of the class that you chose. So each of the different attributes, and I've talked about this in previous videos, but each of the different attributes kind of has its own identity, and I think each of the attributes should have things that it's good at and things that it's bad at. If you are used to playing Magic the Gathering, think of it as the color pie or the color wheel. And so the neutral cards are supposed to help you to fill in those gaps, but because they are, again, not meant to be something that you're good at, they're supposed to be shoring up what you're bad at, they're typically, overcosted. Classic example, right? Like, there's the Dwemer that shackles, and when you look at it, it's 100% inferior to Harpy. Mud Crab, right? Like, it's a running joke and it's a meme for the game, but Mud Crab, it's superiorly inferior. That's kind of an oxymoron, but like, you get my point, right? Like, it's it's just worse than the other 1-drops because you had to commit to an attribute in order to get them, and so on and so forth. Even Crushing Blow. So, like, Crushing Blow is like the gold standard for useful neutral cards in my mind, and that's just because it does some. But again, in my mind, this is how you would want to use a neutral card, right? It does something that a lot of the other attributes don't have access to, which is direct damage, and it provides you with like a little bit of extra removal in case you're missing it, a little bit of extra reach in case you're missing it. But it's not necessarily like overpowered either. And Slaughterfish was just one of those cards. Again, I don't want to necessarily say it was overpowered, but it was so good that there were, like, you had to make a strong argument for not including it in any deck that was aggressive, which is pretty good, right? So the only time, in my opinion, when I think about like neutral cards that should be like that level of good, and even then it's questionable, right? But like neutral cards that should be on the strong side, in my opinion, are like the unique legendary ones, right? Usually they're neutral because they are something that are like flavorful lore wise, and then they're also, even though they're powerful as a neutral legendary, they're still kind of a niche card as well. So like Mundastone, Wabbajack, even Odaving. Like Odaving's super powerful. It's a great late game card. It's also 12 Magicka, and still a unique legendary, right? Goldbrand, unique legendary. You know, you could argue useful in a lot of scenarios, but unique legendary. So for the cards that are not unique legendaries, in my opinion, they should be slightly overcosted and help you fill like a gap or a void. And so Slaughterfish is going from being very, very good to kind of, in my opinion, fitting that neutral thing, right? It's a little overcosted at 4, but helps you to like either you know, make up for creature generation, or, you know, if token decks were still a thing, rip old Divine Fervor, Slaughterfish would be like more ammo for that. Or if your deck needed to make tokens for some reason, then again, now you have an overcosted way to do it. But the whole point is that I think now it feels like a neutral card, where before it felt just like an every class like aggro card that you always wanted to include. Like, it was just that good. And I honestly, like, as long as they both survive for a turn, which, let's be honest, doesn't happen, but when you think about a 6/2 stats, it's just no different than, you know, a 4/4 for 4, really. It's just an aggressive 4/4 for 4. I would honestly say the card now is probably on par with like Imperial Reinforcements in power level, which isn't that great, but again, considering it's a neutral card, I'm okay with it. A lot of the decks that were running this, so when you think about the decks that were running this, right, like a lot of those decks are either so good they're not going to miss it, so that's like Prophecy Battle Mage, or they were already hit really hard this patch with other nerfs. So think like Action Assassin, which typically ran both of these and this. Like, Action Assassin just got neutered. It went from being a very good deck to probably not going to get played. So Slaughterfish, I honestly don't even think this card's going to get missed. There's a lot of like Ward Sorcerer decks that were already not running it. Like, I wasn't running it in my version, so while some people were, again, because the card was just that good before, I don't think it's going to be missed all that much. So yeah, let's continue on. This is probably taking longer than I originally anticipated, but yeah, sorry. Solarus Marshal. Alright, so moving it to 6 means it does come down potentially a little bit later, but now it reduces the cost of the cards by 6. I still think that if you're really going for like that mid-range value play here, that it's still pretty good. Like, now you can Soul Rest into Jarl, like when it is live. You used to be able to do that, but it was on like a whole turn earlier. But now, like, if you have the health lead, you can still chain Soul Rest Marshals together. You can still go Soul Rest into Jarl now. You can go Soul Rest into Golden Saint, which is pretty good. Soul Rest, even into the 5 drops, is still relatively good, even at 6 Magicka as opposed to 5. Getting a free 4/4 out of also playing your Blood Dragon seems good. You can now start doing stuff like Soul Rest into Night Shadow and all of the other 6 drops. The thing that immediately jumped out at me, though, and I don't know why it did, but it did, was the Wisp Mother interaction. So there used to be this like weird crazy combo where if you had just right procs with like Thieves Guild recruits, you could get Odaving out on like turn 6 or something like that. But the funny thing now is with the health lead, and if you have the Ring of Magicka, and you kind of save your charges for the right turns, you can get Odaving out on turn 7 now without even triggering your Thieves Guild recruits. You could even do it potentially faster if you trigger with a Thieves Guild recruit on Wisp Mother. In that case, you could get it as early as like turn 5 with the Ring of Magicka. But basically, what the combo does is you play Wisp Mother, and then if you have the health lead, you play a Soul Rest Marshal, which reduces the next cost of the next card you play by 6. It copies itself. The copy reduces the cost by an additional 6, like the effects stack. So now that he is like a base of 6, you can go straight to Odaving, right? 6 and 6 is 12. So I don't know why my brain went there. Probably won't like be good. Obviously you have to have Odaving in hand, but if you're thinking about like other late game threats, it still lets you cheat out Supreme Atromancer early, Defer early, all sorts of weird stuff. But anyway, that's where my head went. So Wisp Mother, Soul Rest Marshal might be a thing again. Who knows? Yeah. All right. Last one, Hissgrove. Should be no secret if you've watched my previous videos or heard me talk about it on Reddit or on stream, but I think that this was a okay nerf. Again, not because Hissgrove that I felt like it was overpowered in the past, but as I said earlier, cards don't need to be overpowered to warrant nerfing. In my opinion, this one was oppressive in the control scene, in that if you ran a control deck that didn't run Hissgrove, then you didn't run a control deck. Your control deck was just going to lose to all the control decks that did run Hissgrove, likely with no chance at all, unless you included enough early game threats to race said Hissgrove decks, in which case you then just became a mid-range deck, right? Like, not that control is oppressive, not that a Hissgrove card is overpowered, but just the presence of the card and the ability for people to trigger it instantly with no counterplay meant that other control decks just didn't have the option to exist. At least now it's a joke because of the other nerfs, right? But in theory, right, at least now, if you really wanted to play Control Mage, you could do so. You could choose to run Vicious Dro, and you would then at least have a tech or a potential answer for the decks that do run Hissgrove, which was not the case before. Even if you ran Vicious Dro, which a lot of them didn't because they knew it was a moot point, but even if you ran Vicious Dro, because you could get Hissgrove to trigger instantly, it was a moot point. And because the 2 8/8s had no way for you to like clear them without like some sort of like significant amount of planning and investment, right? Like you either had to have creatures ready to trade with one and then nuke the other. You had to have like Piercing Javelin for both of them, or you know, a Dawn's Wrath and trade, or whatever the case may be. And that was just for dealing like with one Hissgrove. The minute they went to multiple Hissgroves, you were basically screwed. Yes, Immolating Blast is a thing, but that cost 6, and then that only reduced you to 2 8/8s. So again, like if you were trying to plan ahead to deal with like a double Hissgrove, you had to have a creature that could trade with 1 8/8 in the field lane, and you had to have an Immolating Blast and then some sort of other hard removal for the other remaining 8/8. So you were essentially investing, you know, 3 or 4 cards to deal with just this one. which on the face of it isn't a huge deal, but when you're in a control mirror and like card advantage is totally what's going to win that, it was backbreaking, right? Like, so, yeah, people say, well, getting to 15 Magicka is hard and I should be rewarded, and I agree 100%. But the problem is against, aggro decks in the matchup, the Hisgrove thing is a moot point about interactivity because most aggro decks aren't running away to deal with the Hisgrove anyway, and if you've hit your 15 Magicka, you've just already won by the nature of you've lasted that long. Hisgrove was kind of a non-factor. Anything could finish the game at that point. And against the control matchups, living to turn 15 isn't really that much of a challenge. Like, let's be honest. Or not turn 15 Magicka, but you get my point. So, in that case, you just won. Again, yeah, sure, a control mage player could try to race you, but they're not really designed to do that because they're also teching against all the aggro stuff. So, this nerf, again, not Hisgrove was overpowered, not that the card was oppressive, in terms of, like, the overall format, but, like, the existence of this card was oppressive in a way that it limited the viability of other control archetypes, and at least now it gives them a chance. Now, I will say that a lot of people are now declaring Scout dead. Between the Snake Tooth Necklace nerf and now this nerf, they're saying, oh my god, I have to wait a whole extra turn. Like, DOA, rip Scout. To which I say, one, again, if you made it to 15 Magicka, waiting one turn isn't going to kill you. And they still have to respond to them, right? Like, if they don't have the removal for your Hisgrove, and if you play multiple Hisgroves, and they don't have removal for all of them, like, you still pop Hisgrove, they still have to deal with your threats. And even, again, if they do manage to kill them, a lot of times it's going to be a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1. And you're playing what should be a control style deck, so that should be a win for you. Maybe not a win like win the game right now, but you're now up in card advantage, which is what you wanted anyway. At least in those like long drawn out matchups. And again, if you're against aggro, if you made it to where you have 15 Magicka, like, you've already won anyway. Anything Swift Breeze is going to win that game at that point because they blew through all their stuff and somehow you're still standing. So yeah, I think that this is good for design space. I also don't think that Scout is dead. And again, just kind of thinking out loud here, in terms of like opening up design space, I think we might see still potentially some Hisgrove Scouts, and we might see some return of what I called the Money Scout. It was often written as a Scout, but with a $sign, the old OG ramp Scout. So for those of you who think that Scout is dead, Scout was long considered a top tier deck, if not the best deck in the format. Even back when Control Mage was like really strong, that deck was giving it a run for its money. Like Broken Control Mage, Money Scout existed, and it still ran ramp cards, and it still ran a plethora of like late game awesome bombs. And that version of the deck, like, nothing's changed. Like, you can still run that. So if you really like, if the Hisgrove thing scares you, and again, I don't think waiting one turn is that big of a deal, but let's just say you're like, oh, I don't want to play Hisgrove anymore. Okay, fine. Then don't. There are still plenty of other ways to win a game, especially the late game, without Hisgrove. It's not like, oh, Hisgrove got nerfed, I can only play aggro now. Like, Blood Magic Lord is still a thing. Odaving is a thing. Red Brahmin is a thing. Like, that deck won before Hisgrove existed. I don't think that the deck is dead. I would not abandon all hope. If anything, I envision a world where maybe now there are versions that do run Hisgrove and versions that don't. Similarly, I think we might see Spellsword control decks that do run Hisgrove and some that don't. And I think that is good for the game. Like, that was the whole point, in my opinion, of, like, this needed to happen in terms of a nerf, because it would be nice to see more than one kind of control deck. I'd like to see control decks that actually focused on controlling the game instead of just ramping up Magicka, because in my opinion, those two things aren't the same. So, yeah. Anyway, like I said, my thoughts on why Hisgrove needed this nerf. I've already said them a lot of times before. I don't think the card was OP before. I don't think the card was oppressive before in terms of like being a broken deck. I just felt like the existence of the card was oppressive in terms of what it did to the control archetype. So Action Assassin I do think is probably dead, given all of those nerfs. In fact, so big elephant in the room, right? Things that are going to be really good now, in my opinion. Again, this is speculative, but I think that your big three, like if I had to pick three top tier decks right now, Prophecy Battle Mage, because the only thing that really affected them at all was Slaughterfish, and I think that you can just plug something else in and still go. If anything, right, like for me, my list already wasn't running Withered Hand Cultist. I know some people's were, but I would just drop this and throw in Withered Hand Cultist. Why? Because it's a great 3-drop, and now that I'm running one less action, I have no disincentive for including it. So that deck will still be good. Ward Sorcerer, still going to be really good. Again, some versions ran this, but otherwise, basically untouched. So mid-range, so what I would call the mid-range, like value Sorcerer. I say mid-range because, again, it would be the version not running Slaughterfish. Still really good, right? And then for the other, like, third leg, right, so that's an aggro deck and a mid-range deck. So if I had to pick, like, the top control deck, I think it's still going to probably be, like, the combo Merrick Battle Mage, because other than Crystal Tower Crafter, you may notice that also didn't get touched. So Merrick used to run CTC as a 2-drop. Not because it was like trying to win. Like sometimes you would go off just because if you happen to get like the right opener, you could grow that thing to a 5/5 quickly. But it wasn't the focus of the deck, and it didn't happen often. The card was just great like value, and it was a high priority 2-drop where sometimes you would play it and people would see it and just like, you know, because of the reputation of Crystal Tower Crafter, they would go, okay, I have to kill that before it's a problem. So they would invest in that, and that would buy you time. I think that there are other ways that Merrick can still shore up their early game to compensate for the loss of CTC. And since it wasn't a primary win condition, I think that deck's going to be just fine. So I think those would be the big three for now. I do think there is plenty of room for other decks to now like rise up, even given the nerfs. I think that so cards I think might see more play now. Restless Templar might see a comeback, especially in like Spellsword control. You used to run Pillaging Tribune, but if you really need life gain now, and the friendly creature drain thing from Tribune isn't enough, you could expect to see Templar, or maybe they'll run both, right? Maybe the plan is Templar on 4, Tribune it on 5, and then trade with something, and then you gain 10 life. Seems pretty strong. So, yeah, Action Assassin I think is dead. The big three I think are fine. I think that there might be room for more control decks to potentially see play. I think that the Alter Assassin deck is probably mostly untouched as well, so I think that might see a rise in popularity now. I think some of them are running like either a 1 or a 2 of some of these just for some utility, but otherwise not really that big of a deal. Item Sorcerer as opposed to Word Sorcerer could also still see some play, and likely will. Yeah. So I know that there are some decks that I want to try. When I read the patch notes, I started kind of like immediately brewing potential control decks now that I don't feel obligated to run Histgrove, so that's exciting. But that in a nutshell is my joking quick analysis, as now we're closing in on like 45 minutes of me rambling. So if you made it this far in the video, you deserve a medal. Round of applause is for you. And yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think, as always. So you know, post comments on the video itself. Let me know what you think. Are these the worst thing ever? I don't honestly think that these are the worst things ever. I do think that Some people were really, really, really hoping for some nerfs to the Prophecy Battle Mage deck. I think that they were disappointed that there weren't many in this, and that is an acceptable opinion that I can empathize with. However, we don't know what their... So I will say this about both Direwolf slash Bethesda, right? Like, we don't know what their development life cycle is like. So I remember about 2 months ago, 3-ish, there was a time where Action Assassin was running rampant. And if you look now, Action Assassin is basically dead. Now, I'm not saying that 2 or 3 months is their development life cycle, but we don't know how long they propose things and then internally test things and then finalize things before they hit live. So just because you don't see the Battle Mage nerfs that you were hoping or expecting in this patch, I wouldn't be discouraged about like never seeing them. I would just say that there's a chance that they just didn't make it into this wave because, again, we don't know how long their process is. So I would wager that they're just trying to not do knee-jerk reactions, and this might be, again, I'm just theorizing, right? But this might be an old holdover from, because it was a little bit ago, before the rise of Prophecy Battle Mage, there was a time where Action Assassin was like everywhere on the ladder, and this might be the results of that coming to fruition. So I don't know, we'll see, but I wouldn't be too discouraged. The fact that they're doing balance changes is, I think, still encouraging, whether you agree with the changes or not. And as we get closer to what is hopefully a full release of the game, I imagine they will do at least one more round of balance changes when that time comes. And I think that a lot of the changes do show they are looking to the future. Again, otherwise you can't justify in my opinion, the nerfs to like Dune Smuggler or Stalker in terms of like a competitive standpoint, but in a plan for the future / trying to make the game more interactive. I think it makes total sense. So yeah, thanks for watching. Leave your comments and your responses. Let me know what you think. Hope to catch you again soon now that things are settling down, hopefully in my schedule. And yeah, I'll see you, as always, I'll see you next time.